on one extreme you have, I don't know if you have, there was a French philosopher called Voltaire, and he wrote a book, Candide, which is a kind of novel. He didn't write, I think it might be the only novel he wrote. Candide it's a satirical novel. It's about a man who travels through the world, and the world is totally insane. It's kind of exaggerated insane, but basically he shows wherever he goes from country to country. In every country, people are completely insane and cruel and malignant and horrible. And finally, he comes to the end of his journey, and he's in Turkey, I think, and he meets a man who seems quite wise, and he asks him, what about the situation of the rebellion that is here, that's happening here? And he says, I don't know anything about that. And the man says, all you can do is cultivate. The man has a garden. All you can do is cultivate your garden. That's the famous phrase. Cultivate your garden, which is make sure that there's sanity in your immediate surroundings. You can take the garden either literally, because of course it's good to be in touch with nature, or you can take it metaphorically as the garden, meaning have an area of sanity around you that also affects the world to some extent. So cultivate your garden is one way. That would mean don't worry about the rest of the world. That is one extreme. The other extreme would be, I need to save the world. And then you can active. Perhaps the answer lies in between the two extremes, but not forgetting to cultivate your garden, even while if you do take action in one way or another, it's still very important how you conduct your life, your immediate surroundings, your relationships, your close relationships, and then other relationships, all that spreads out from you. That's what you create. In a way, you have two kinds of worlds. You have the world, your personal world, people you know, what you do, where you move, your surroundings. Then there's another world that you mostly have access to through the media. So then you watch the news. Then you get communication on social media, whatever. This is the world that is the secondary world to you that is happening elsewhere. So here you have your world, which is immediate sensory perception, not through screens, TV screens or other screens or phones. It's just your immediate surroundings. That's your garden. And that's very important. It's not to be neglected. Because there are people who want to make the world a better place, and they have horrible relationships. All their relationships are full of conflict and antagonism, and they want to create a better world. So you have your garden, and then you have the other dimension of the world, which is what you see when you watch the news and so on. Sometimes the two come together, because there could be something happening that you see on TV, like the virus, and then perhaps you may catch the virus. So then suddenly something that you only saw on TV suddenly comes into your garden. That can happen. So they can intersect also. But it's important to be aware of the two dimensions, the world that you have mostly access to through the screens that you look at. And in the past, for people, that the only world they had was their personal surroundings. They didn't even know in many cases what was happening 50 miles away before modern communications. So all that, and most people spend their life in their town or village, their whole life. So we have a very complicated world, because we have all the troubles of millions of other people. We're aware of them through the screen. So it's an interesting situation. Again, be aware of your garden. Make sure that's the same place. And then if that's the same place, then most of the insanity you see on the screen. And sometimes you meet it comes into your garden too. That's possible. So you see what is possible to do, but wisdom is to not be reactive, not act out of anger or fear or any egoic motives. Only then can you do some good. Some situations have a lot of momentum, and the momentum is sometimes so crazy that there's absolutely nothing you can do. It has to play itself out. In the same way, you might have met some people who you're trying to help them, and you're trying again to help them, and they go through the same destructive patterns again and again, and you're trying to help again. Sometimes it happens with people's children as they grow up and they do stupid things. And they're trying to help and support them and help, but nothing seems to work. At some point, you have to say they have to experience the bitterness of suffering that they create for themselves. That may be the only possibility for their evolution of their consciousness and coming to the end of their insanity. That's perhaps a possibility if they experience. Some people are drug addicted. They reach a point where they can see that either they'll die soon, or something needs to change. Some are put in prison, and in prison they begin to wake up and they see this cannot go on. So, and if you hadn't put them in prison, they would still be on the street. And it's interesting. My father was in Germany. He spoke up against, as a young man, he spoke up against the Hitler regime, and they put him in prison. Now, he didn't do it out of some kind of desire to change anything, but he was always very impulsive and got angry very easily. So, and then he lost it. He didn't want to say it, but he had to say it by the group. And then the next day they arrested him. And nothing at that point, nothing you could have done would have made any difference, because the momentum of the unconsciousness was so vast and enormous. A few conscious people were able to leave the country. They removed themselves. Some others were able to completely focus on their garden. It's an extreme form of ego, extreme mass psychosis. It can last for several decades or a few years. And when that happens, there's nothing you can do except cultivate your garden. Cannot fight that huge wave of unconsciousness. But there may be other situations where you see perhaps something can be done here or there or there. So you have to see how vast this movement is of unconsciousness, and it's happening in the US now, of course. As you see, there's a lot of craziness. So what to do? Only wisdom can tell you what to do or whether to do anything, and then in the meantime, always come back to your garden. The garden is also your inner being at the deepest level. The garden is your inner state of being, where you can be free. That's the important thing. The craziness exists out here, but the awakening can only happen ultimately in the individual. You cannot awaken the world. The awakening happens in every individual. When enough individuals transcend the ego, then the world changes. So my work is mostly concerned with a causal level, not the level of effect. So the causal level is human consciousness, human unconsciousness, human consciousness. That's the level of cause. And that should also be your primary consideration, is the level of cause. The next is the level of effect. The level of effect is dependent upon the consciousness that underlies whatever you do. So the world is the level of effect. Consciousness is a level of cause. So at the deepest level, what Voltaire calls the cultivate your garden, at the deepest level, the garden is your innermost being, and that's primary. When that is sane, when that emanates from you also. Even if you took no action specifically to change anything, it does emanate from you into this world, because all humans are connected in consciousness. There is a collective human consciousness, and whatever change you undergo in your consciousness is part of the collective human consciousness. Even if you didn't take any action, if you lived consciously in all your dealings in your world, that affects the world, not only the people you come into contact with, it even affects people you don't come into contact with.